Hey friends, this is the third video lecture in the first chapter of childhood growth and development, and we are talking about theory. The first theorist we talked about was Freud, where I introduced the idea of a Freudian perspective, and Freudian perspectives emphasize the role of the subconscious. The subconscious being those things that are below our awareness. I want to pick up talking about another Freudian psychologist. He's actually was a student of Freud's, and this is actually one of the developmental psychologists that I think that I like the most. We'll come back to him repeatedly. His theories are show up a lot, and this is a fellow by the name of Erickson. Now, you'll notice on all of these slides, I've listed the dates, and the dates are, I will never quiz you about the dates of theorists at all. I simply put these on there so that you have some idea about when they existed. Like, are these very old ideas or are these relatively modern? And so this fella died not quite 30 years ago. So he would be considered a contemporary theorist. His theory is what we'll call psychosocial. So you have the psycho, meaning the things that are in our brains, right? The psychological, but he also acknowledges the role of the social. And Erickson's model argues that development is a series of stages that we go through these different stages over life, and we have to, similar to Freud, where Freud was, you go from the oral stage to the anal stage, and if it's not successful, you'll have troubles in the future. Erickson's model kind of is like that too. And here you have a list of all of his stages, but he called these crises, and I don't think that's the way it's described in your textbook. It is the way it's described in other textbooks, but the point is that you go through these stages, and depending upon if you successfully how you handle that crisis. Probably not the way you and I use the term crisis, but okay, let me get to the point. So you have a list here, and you go from like trust to mistrust as an infant, and then autonomy to shame, and initiative to guilt. And the idea again is that you have something that must be that you have to learn as you go through these stages. So for instance, the infant, trust or mistrust. And for in Erickson's model, if a child doesn't learn to trust their caregiver, this will be a problem for them in the rest of life. So let me back up. A baby is born completely dependent upon adults. If when the baby expresses a need or cries, an adult comes to them, they express a need and they cry, then what the child learns is that they can trust. If, on the other hand, a child cries, no adult comes, nobody takes care of them, then they learn not to trust, that people are not good, people will not necessarily take care of me. And so this person grows up not trusting in others. So later on, we'll talk about the idea of attachment theory, and this is the basis of attachment theory. The basis of attachment theory says that if a child's needs are met in infancy, they will learn to trust other people, and then they will be able to attach with other people in the future. Following along, and this is not really the time right now for me to walk through each of these different stages because we'll talk more about them later on. But then you move on to a child who's 1 to 2. This is the stage of autonomy versus shame. If you've ever been around a toddler when they want to do it all themselves, no, me do, I want to do, and how that is resolved, if that's resolved successfully, then a child learns that they're independent, that they have autonomy. Autonomy means they can do things for themselves. If, on the other hand, they're never allowed to try anything, they're never allowed to do anything, then they learn shame, and they think that they can't do anything because, honestly, the adults have never let them do anything. Then you get to age 3 and 4, you have initiative versus guilt. Again, if a child successfully transitions through this, they will continue to try new things. If, on the other hand, everything that the 3-year-old or the 4-year-old tries, like, why did you do that? You just screw everything up. You can't do it. Then they will learn to feel guilty and they will feel bad about themselves. You have industry and inferiority, the same kind of thing. If In this stage of life, a child has opportunity to do new things and they're successful. They develop industry, which is a fancy way of saying that they want to contribute. If, on the other hand, every time everything they do they fail, right, then they learn to feel inferior. So this is a good stage in child development to help a child find something that they're good at. Because from Erickson's model, if a child in the ages of 6 to 11 doesn't find something they're good at, then they will feel inferior. Then you get to the adolescence, which is the end of our course, and you've got identity versus role confusion. And this is why I love to talk about the chapter of adolescence. This is a stage of life where you are supposed to experiment and try new things, right? You're supposed to try out all those roles. You're establishing your identity. And then in young adulthood, you have intimacy. Are you going to pair bond with somebody, or are you going to basically live alone? You've got middle age, that would be me. You're wanting to leave something behind. That's nativity versus I'm stuck here. And then you have integrity versus despair later in life. So again, Erickson's model is that by interacting with others, you've got the social, you develop a sense of yourself, part of your personality, that's the psycho, and there's a different goal. There's a different kind of development that comes with each stage of life. Okay, let me just very generally introduce the next group of thinkers before my 10 minutes is up. And the next couple guys, and they're all guys, are what we call behavioralists. And what behavioralists focus on is only what can be observed. So where you had Erickson and Freud were about the things that were below your awareness, the behavioralists, there's no sort of like it's only about what we can see, right? So they're focusing on, these are where you get the learners. Okay. The classic behavioralists, the ones that you probably are familiar with, is Ivan Pavlov. He's the one that worked with the dogs and the salivating dogs. And he's credited with a kind of behavioralism that we call classic conditioning. So in the classical conditioning model, a person, in this case we're talking about dogs, but this is true for people too, is a person learns to associate something with something else. So before a dog or before a person learns something, right? Okay, so let me just explain Pavlov, and then I'll have some better examples later on. So in Pavlov's model, right, you give a dog a bone or some food and they salivate because that's their natural response, right? That's how they're biologically programmed to do. You ring a bell, the dog doesn't respond because that's not a natural response. If, however, you give a dog a bowl of food and ring a bell, and you do this over and over again, right? Because they're going to salivate because of the food, but eventually the way the brain works is they will come to associate the food, the salivation, with the bell. So eventually you can take the food away and ring the bell, and it will cause salivation. And this is what we call a conditioned response. The natural response, I don't know if you see my marker or not, the natural response is to salivate only with the food, not with the bell. But because I have conditioned / trained the dog to associate the bell with the food, now they respond to the food. Here's the thing. Why are we talking about Pavlov in child development? Because children learn the same things. People learn the same things. People will often learn to associate. Okay, here's one for me. When my cell phone dings, right? When my cell phone chimes, I get this little oh, right? Because I have come to associate that sound from my phone with interacting with my friends. So I get this pleasant sort of response associated with, and that's not a very good example because what was the unconditioned response? But I hope you get the general gist of what I'm talking about, is that something may trigger a response naturally, but when we come to associate with something else, or let me think of another good example. Maybe, trying to think of a good one with children. All of them that I come up with have to do with my dogs. Okay, I'm going to stop here because time is up. getting near the end of my 10 minutes. And when I come back, I will talk about another behavioralist. This fella is Watson. Okay.